haven't seen him.
This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, I'd like to call the village board meeting to order for Tuesday, July 26th. Roll call, please.
President Kardasky.
Here.
Trustee Paul.
Here.
Trustee Kubacki.
Here.
Trustee Zerbal.
Here.
Trustee Krieger.
Here.
Trustee Flukie.
Here.
And Trustee Service.
Here.
Okay, please stand for the pledge. And please remember our men and women throughout the world in uniform. I have no changes to the agenda. I need a motion to approve, please.
Move to approve.
Second.
Motion and a second to approve as presented. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Excuse me. Number 5, action on open and closed minutes from June 28, 2022.
Move to approve.
Second.
Motion and a second to approve those minutes. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Number 6, comments from the public must be limited to items not on the agenda, must state your name and address. You're limited to 5 minutes. The board's role is to listen and not discuss the item. Personnel issues cannot be discussed nor individuals named, and the board is not able to take action at this meeting. We have no public here in the village hall. Is there anybody on the web that would like to make any comments on items not on the agenda? Hearing none, we'll move on. 7, written communications or announcements. I have one written communication that I received here from a resident that was very happy that our forestry department did such a great job cleaning up Pioneer Park. I always like to, I know Rex was copied on this, and he sent a thank you to Tim, and I always like to announce when these things happen, because we always hear when we have bad emails or comments. So kudos to our forestry department and parks department for that. Anybody else have any comments?
The only comment I want to make, I had some interesting phone calls from the constituents that I have around the Packer Stadium about parking on the street. And let me tell you, they were quite interesting. And I won't elaborate anymore on it.
Okay. Thank you. Anybody else?
I just want to mention I had quite a few calls in regard to the fireworks, sorry. On around 4th of July, a lot of residents were not happy with the amount that was going off in our neighborhood. So I did talk to the chief about it a little bit and asked him what our policy and procedure is for that. And it sounds like they give a warning the first time, and then if they continue throwing them off, they'll confiscate them and give them a ticket. I don't know if you had a chance to check if you had any issues or any tickets you gave this year.
Back to see if we issued any citations at all. None come to mind. Do you guys remember any of those? I don't recall any. Yeah. So I'm not sure if we wrote any citations or not, quite honestly.
And, you know, the Public Safety Department did do a good job getting the information out about what you could do and couldn't do. But maybe next year we can hit a little harder with Haley on board. We could maybe get more information out early to hopefully curtail some of that a little bit.
Yeah, there were a lot of fireworks going off in my neighborhood too. Yeah. And it was, I mean, it wasn't just the night of the 4th. It was like Wednesday night, Thursday night, Friday night. So, yeah. Yeah.
Just to add, if the board wants us to deliver a different approach, I guess we could certainly talk about that as well. So right now, again, our first line is to approach, warn, and then if we could call back there again and we observe the violations, then we'll confiscate and ticket. So if there's another approach that the board wants us to take, I'll be happy to listen to it.
Thank you.
And it's hard to catch them in the act, too.
It is.
I mean, you get complaints, and it's a tough battle.
Okay. Number 8, action on the consent agenda, action on operator's license, action on change of agent for True North Energy LLC, DBA True North number 810, Michelle A. Knox. C, action on change of agent, Quick Trip Inc., DBA Quick Trip 430 Laura Kenzer. D, action on change of agent, Air Host Green Bay Inc., DBA Air Host Green Bay Restaurant and Lounge, Ian Zastro. E, general fund financial report, June 2022. F, budgeted expenditures, and G, department reports. If nobody wants anything pulled, I will entertain a motion to accept.
Move to approve.
Second.
Motion and a second to approve the consent agenda as presented. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Number 9, this is a public hearing regarding ordinance number 07-3-22, comprehensive revision to section 17-6-200 Ashwaubenon Municipal Code, signs. This is the public hearing part of it. Is there anybody here that would like to speak for or against this ordinance change? Anybody like to speak for or against the ordinance change? Hearing none. I need a motion to close the public hearing.
Move to close the public hearing.
Second.
Motion and a second to close the public hearing. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you. Number 10, action items. Action regarding ordinance number 07-3-22, comprehensive revision to Ashwaubenon sign ordinance, section 17-6-200 Ashwaubenon Municipal Code. Joel, you're going to be Aaron tonight, I guess.
I am. Yes, thank you, Madam President, members of the board. Following the public hearing tonight in regards to ordinance number 07322, this is a comprehensive revision to the sign code within the Ashwaubenon Municipal Zoning Code or Municipal Code. The result of this is because of a Supreme Court decision that was made in 2015, the Reed versus Town of Gilbert decision, in which, as a result of that decision, it was found that municipalities cannot regulate signs, or I should say, cannot regulate the content of signs. And so the basic framework is if you have to read the sign in order to regulate it, in all likelihood, you are violating that individual's ability for free speech. And so we needed to go through a complete comprehensive review of our sign code to ensure that we are compliant with that Supreme Court decision. And so Aaron and his staff team have gone ahead and done that. We've had a number of meetings at committee level that have reviewed the sign code, both at Site Plan and Planning Commission, to which point those items were brought back and forth several times with several different iterations. I will note that the sign code that is in place or that is being proposed does still regulate in accordance to that Supreme Court decision, whether it's an on-premise or off-premise signage. So we do have the ability to regulate to a greater degree off-premise signage, but if it's on-premise, then obviously we don't have as much ability to regulate content from that standpoint. Where this really affects is really kind of residential signs, so political signs, things of that nature. We can regulate size, location, and the duration of which that sign is placed, and this code does address those issues. Again, what we can't regulate is the actual content of it. Now, given the nature of our current political and partisan type environment, we are seeing quite a few signs and things of that nature that might have language that would be deemed inappropriate. Unfortunately, we cannot regulate that type of language through this code. Doesn't necessarily mean we won't have conversations with those residents and those homeowners and those property owners to ask them to remove the signs or take them and put them somewhere a little bit more conspicuous, but we simply cannot regulate the sign based on content for that purposes alone. So with that, I'll answer any questions, and Patrick will certainly address any legal issues or disparities that I made in my comments.
As it relates to the content on some signs and some flags, I just want to thank Public Safety for going out there and making some contacts there on some signage in my neighborhood, in my wards, that was not of a content that should be viewed as community-based or family-based or whatever. So with that, I'd like to thank Public Safety for your efforts on that behalf.
Patrick, I was wondering if you can kind of clarify, because you and I talked about this, about the offensive language that we could have some say over on signs.
Sure. So the sign code does allow, it does permit, just as the old sign code would allow for language that might be deemed offensive or harming or something of that nature. The sign code or the sign itself could still be regulated in that sense. So this wouldn't take away the village's ability to somewhat say that a sign on somebody's neighbor or someone's front yard could be deemed as offensive. Now, again, that is the actual perspective from the reader and what is offensive, and that just has to be taken on like kind of a case-by-case basis. But that still is within the police powers of the municipality to regulate that. So again, it really, depending what the sign would say, that is what the courts have not taken away in the terms of regulating the content. We can still regulate that depending on how offensive that language might be. For example, if discriminating against like a class of individuals, for example.
So when somebody does put up the, F, whatever president it is that they want to put that up, we can go there and tell them to take it down because it is offensive.
Depending on the perspective of the reader. Now, some people might say that that is certainly appropriate, depending on, because one, it's political speech, and two, it could be protected speech. But let's, again, it's probably going to have to be based on a case-by-case basis with who is considering that to be offensive, and what the actual sign says, and maybe how many there are. But certainly under certain examples like that can still be regulated.
Okay, it's good to know.
Well, and Patrick, you gave me a good example of signage that might, and Steve had just mentioned it, the peace and prosperity of a neighborhood. If there's signage up that, like Steve just said, in his neighborhood, he was offended and felt, some of this shouldn't be up there. So that's something else that could be looked at, correct?
Yeah.
I think, Patrick, too, if you could comment maybe on flags, that seems to be an area of concern, because oftentimes we'll see language that may be deemed inappropriate by some on flags, and if flags are regulated under this proposed sign code.
It is. It's basically kind of under the same circumstances. Really, it depends on what is to be offensive and what is not. There's a specific designation under flags under the sign code, pretty much falling under the same perspective. What is deemed to be harmful? What is offending the peace and prosperity of the actual neighborhood, and what might be deemed as hurtful or offensive language. Again, perspective of the reader, and it really is going to depend on what the flag says, but it's essentially the same thing. And really what the sign code really comes down to is, here's an example. You can't regulate this Supreme Court case that Joel mentioned out of, I think it was Arizona back in 2015. Essentially, you can't regulate, let's say a church says church service is 9 to 11, but the sign says it's a political speech. You cannot regulate these two separately. They have to be regulated under the same ordinance. So you can't have a specific time for that religious sign and a specific time for that political sign. So that's why this is kind of creating a uniform, content-neutral regulation where it doesn't matter what the sign says, as long as we regulate the time, place, and manner. That's kind of a typical example.
Okay. Any other discussion? Okay, I'll need a motion to approve.
Motion to approve. I know we went over this in planning. I read this back a number of months ago. I know there's been a number of revisions, but I'll make a motion to approve. Ordinance number 07-3-22, revising the sign ordinance. I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve ordinance 07-3-22. Any other discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you. 10B, public safety presentation. Chief, it's your show.
You can let me share my screen? Give me a second here while I try to share my screen. There we go. All right, I appreciate the board giving me some time to go over public safety, staffing, efficiencies. That's really what we're going to talk about tonight. I've got Commander Murphy and Deputy Chief Kozlowski here with me to kind of join in the conversation. And hopefully between the three of us, we can answer any questions that you guys might have during the process. Please feel free to stop me with any questions you have. Tracy, I'll work on the acronyms and we'll get those taken care of.
Thank you.
You bet. So the first slide is really kind of to give you a rundown of what our public safety model looks like. I know you've all seen in one form or another what the organizational chart looks like. But really what our model is we have essentially 36 officers who work a 24 on, 48 off schedule. Of that 24 hours, 8 of those hours are assigned to law enforcement, police services, and 16 of those hours are assigned to fire and EMS. We also have 4 night shift officers who are strictly law enforcement. They work a 6 on, 3 off schedule. And mainly that's our newer officers who are still being trained in the other disciplines, the fire and the EMS as well. So that really fits that schedule for them pretty well, so we can get them trained on the other disciplines.
What are their hours then with the night shift from 1 to when?
So normally they work from 11 to 7, right? No, 10, yeah, at night. So 11 to 7 at night. That way, any scheduling that we have for classes and things like that, they're during the day, they can do that. If we have to give them some time off to be able to schedule that stuff, we do that as well. So it really allows flexibility for us in order to get them trained. And then we have other staff. We have 8 who are law enforcement only staff. Basically, that's our canine officer, our investigators, our school resource officers, and we have a member assigned to the drug task force. So DTF, that's what we see, that's drug task force. And so that's really kind of the public safety model. Obviously, then you have the 3 command staff members as well. We're assigned during the day. And using that same model, those officers that are work during the day, they might be assigned to other duties like investigations or whatever it might be. If we need to use them to supplement our on-call, backfill our staff or EMS, they're allowed to do that as well, providing that we have that option to do that. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what it takes to develop a public safety officer, talking about training them and getting them up to speed, because right now we have 5 people that are in training. 3 are actually in the FTO program right now. 2 are in the law enforcement academy. So you talk about if we hire someone who has no training that we have to send to the law enforcement academy, that's 720 hours or 18 weeks that they've got to go and get certified as a law enforcement officer. Then once they've completed that, they have a 3-month or a 12-week field training officer program that they go through. They're always riding with an officer, a field training officer, to make sure that not only do they understand how we do things, why we do the things that we do, and they get trained on software and everything else in order to be able to perform their job. So really, that process to get started, if they have no training, they need certified, is really about an 8-month training till they're on solo patrol, and we can use them as an individual officer. And we try to coordinate that as much as we can with academy start dates. So since the academies are so long now, they only offer a couple times a year, depending on where you're going and when those academies start. So, and then we have EMS training. EMT basic is mandatory. It's 1 semester long, evening classes, and those are usually done before night shift patrol. Usually that's done the first semester after the conclusion of their FTO. We kind of start that training process for them. And the paramedic, which is optional, they do get incentive for that. They get a $4,000 incentive to be a paramedic, but those are one of the requirements that we need to run a paramedic service ambulance. So we have to have enough staff that are paramedic certified in order to be able to do that, but that takes an entire year That's a very comprehensive program to go through, very extensive. It's really kind of a full-time job for them, so we really allow them to concentrate on that since it's such a heavy discipline. And if they're able to work on the weekends, we allow them to do that. Fire training, firefighter 1, which is mandatory. That's a little bit shorter. It's 1 semester, 116 hours, evening classes. Usually that's done before night shift patrol. Just to let you all know, I am going to firefighter 1 class starting this fall, so I'll get to see all that firsthand to be able to learn how to be a firefighter, I guess, and figure out how to put the wet stuff on the hot stuff, because that's what I usually say before all this. But now I'll actually learn how to do that. But that's a good class. We really try to get that done after they've gone to EMT and kind of roll into that. There's also entry-level driver operator. They obviously need to know how to operate our equipment, our apparatus, to be able to do that. And entry-level driver operator as far as the aerial goes, and that's a ladder truck, and that's a 6-hour class. So that whole process can take anywhere from 18 months to 3 years if you talk about the paramedic level training including in that. So it's quite extensive to get that done. So just wanted to give you guys an idea of what it looks like when we bring someone on and how long that process takes. So what is a public safety officer? I don't know how well you can see the picture, but we have someone here dressed that has the firefighter pants on, the EMT bag, and then a police officer top uniform with a rifle in. But we'll talk a little bit about, as a public safety agency, how we operate in our schedule, with 8 hours being law enforcement and 16 being fire and EMS, what that really equates to. And really what that equates to, and I know it doesn't add up to 100, and I'll kind of explain that to you, but really what on our shift, those particular shifts, we are 66% of a normal firefighter EMT. So we're doing 66% of a full-time firefighter's duties. That's all they do, right? Their entire shift is firefighting EMT. While we have law enforcement duties, we are 47% of a law enforcement officer. And really what that means is, now there are different shifts and different schedule and different hours. Just to make it easy, we just use a regular 40-hour week. So we use 20-80 hours. You divide that 8 hours of the shift, that comes to 970 hours per year, which comes to 47%. So really, in our shift, that 8 hours over the course of the year, we are 47% of a full-time law enforcement officer. So that's why the numbers don't add up. Those are the percentages that we're working per shift and how that adds up. So during the shift, where other agencies, and we'll talk about De Pere as we go along, they're fully concentrated on fire and EMS on one side and law enforcement on the other side. They have 2 separate agencies doing that. We're one agency doing all of it. So that's why it's split up the way it is. Does that make sense? Okay. This one is just really talking about that day again. So I know this is hard for you guys to see, but I sent that out for you ahead of time. But really what the basic structure is, depending on the shift that they're working and their patrol time. So the first column you'll see is an 8-hour patrol shift, and you'll see that blocked out in yellow, and then they may have an hour report writing after that. And then once that shift is over and they start working on their firefighter EMT section, that's 16 hours, you can see if they only average 4 EMS calls that shift, those are highlighted in red. And so those are some of the times that they may be working. Now, I will tell you that that's not always common. These are averages. Last Friday, for example, they had 12 rescue calls on a shift. So think about that, looking at this schedule and plugging those in there. How does that work, right? They have little to no downtime whatsoever during their shift when you have that many calls per shift. And you'll see on the right side, we're comparing the De Pere firefighter EMT out of Station 1. Now, they have 2 stations they work out of, but if you look at it, from 7 to 8 in the morning, they may have work time. They may have a call at 9. Then they continue the work time at 10. And then out of Station 2, there may be a call. But that rest of that in green is their downtime. They have nothing else going on during that. That may take a couple calls, but you see they have a lot more free time, if you will, a lot more work time where they can get things done. Where we don't really have any downtime because we have that 8-hour shift, and then we have calls stacked on top of that. So this is really kind of what it looks like. as we compare it to other agencies who aren't public safety as to what we do. And so if we have things that we need to get called in for, we may call in road cars to backfill the station as staffing allows. So it's really talking about the flexibility of our model and how we use it to be as efficient as we can, to reduce overtime as we can. But one of the things that, I tried to work with the Fitch study was working in training and stuff like that during shift. Well, you can see if we have calls like we did last Friday, that's just not possible. You can't do it. So it makes it difficult to do that. But that's really kind of what a PSO's day is supposed to look like, as best we can. And that's really what the model is based off of. So are there any questions on that specifically? So we're going to talk about a PSO's days and a schedule. So I'm going to hand this over to Brian. He's going to talk a little bit about what the day looks like. And then Nick is going to talk a little bit after that about the day we had today as well.
So on this particular slide here, we pulled a daily assignment sheet for July 6th. This is a pretty average day for what we've had this summer. On this particular day, our base staffing should be 3 supervisors and 9 public safety officers working the 24-hour shift. Now that's the base staffing before you start putting in earned off time and other complications into the schedule. So for example, on July 6th, 2022, right off the bat, we had 1 PSO off for a workers' comp work-related injury. We had another PSO off that was attending paramedic school during the day. Now that PSO was available to assist for station staffing later that day, but their workday, if you will, instead of being a police road shift, was their paramedic school shift. We had 2 PSOs off on vacation. That is our minimum. That is our maximum for what is allowed off on vacation to allow our people adequate work-life balance and to be able to use the time that they're entitled to. We had, of our night shift public safety officers, we had 1 night shift public safety officer out on workers' comp. However, that PSO was able to also attend EMT school during the evening, so we were able to recoup some of that time to be productive time with some of those workers' comp restrictions. So of this 9 PSO shift, talking just about the 24-hour shift, we had an authorized staff of 9, but an effective staff of only 6. And that was due to having 2 officers off on vacation and 1 officer off on paramedic school. Our supervisors were fully staffed. We have a full complement of supervisors for our department. But with the authorized level of supervisors, today we had, on July 6th, we had only 2 supervisors working. We had 1 off on vacation. With the current authorized staffing level of supervisors, that precludes us from having that 24-hour on-the-road supervision. We do have supervisors assigned to monitor the road and be responsible and ready to respond onto the road if there is something that is requiring their presence. But we don't have them actively patrolling during that time. When 1 supervisor is assigned to the road responsibilities, the other one is assigned to station supervisor responsibilities, similar to a traditional fire company officer. Some of the efforts that we have taken to add more staff that are necessary and useful and productive do, through that process, add more overtime to our daily operations. So on July 6th, we did have 2 new PSOs that are on training. In order to train public safety officers, we use specially trained officers referred to as field training officers. These officers are trained and experienced in successfully introducing new officers into the full role and responsibilities of being a public safety officer. Each shift has a minimum of 2 field training officers. Now we have 3 people that we are getting through field training right now. At this point on July 6th, we only had 2. Where that complicates staffing is we need to shift the road shift of those field training officers to align with the shift of the trainee. And that also reduces our numbers somewhat because even though we have 2 people in that squad car, only one of them is a fully trained officer. So we have to treat that like a single person squad car. And we had 2 of those this day, one on the day shift and one on the afternoon shift. And those are highlighted in green on the daily assignment sheet. Due to the bumps that we had to accommodate for that, that did leave us a little short on coverage, in addition to the vacations, the workers' comp, and our night shift being under strength on July 6th. So that did result in 2 shifts being covered with overtime. One partial night power shift from 7P to 11P, and one 8-hour night shift from 11P to 7A resulted in overtime. So due to a confluence of factors here, we had to expend 12 hours of overtime on this day just to meet our minimum staffing. And this type of day is really not an exception to what we've been encountering lately. When it comes to call volume, looking at our fire calls for July up until today's date, July of 2022 up until today, we peaked at one day where we had 19 fire EMS calls. We've had 8 days this month where we've been in the double digits for fire and EMS calls. July of 2021, up until this date in July of 2021, we had no days that reached double digits. We had a few days that topped out at 9 calls. So we've noticed quite a bit of increased call volume throughout the day. And when we're at minimums, that limits our ability to respond to those second out calls with an effective force.
Have you been able to figure out the reasons why we've had such an increase? I mean, obviously we're coming off a pandemic, but any insights, I guess?
EMS calls have been increasing around the area. And when we look at our CAD calls, say in comparison with De Pere, we do follow kind of the broad trends there. EMS calls are approximately 80% of what we do for fire EMS calls, and that's not out of line with our profession as a whole. Nationwide, people are more users of EMS, and if you look at within our particular jurisdiction, we do have several medical facilities, we do have a nursing home, and we do also have a lot of other attractions that do place a bit of a demand on our EMS service. Also, if you look at the demographics of our community, we do have a community that's getting a slightly older population. And as those demographics change, demands for EMS service change along with that. We've also got some other sociological issues that lead to that. One of those being the unfortunate increase in drug overdose cases, which generate police and EMS calls, sometimes very involved police calls.
Yeah, I kind of get the overall changes, but just curious, because, that's quite a change going from single digits to double digits. What is your gut feeling? What is the majority of that?
We've had a pretty significant driver in our EMS calls from a couple things. One being an urgent care facility located here within the village. Okay. They are a significant driver in a lot of EMS calls. We've also had I'm
assuming that is because people go to that urgent care unit that probably should be going directly to the hospital, and then you end up having to transport them.
I would say if the ultimate destination ends up being an emergency room, they may have been best served by going directly to an emergency room.
Gotcha. Okay.
And then also the presence of the airport as well. We do take EMS medical flights that come in. We do have a contract with one of those providers to provide EMS transport from the airport to one of the hospitals. We have tried to structure that to be as efficient as we can. We do get a certain base rate for each of those calls, and we are able to staff it with a reduced crew because essentially we are the ambulance taxi service, if you will, between Austin, Schwabnen, and a downtown hospital. We provide the driver EMT, they provide the flight medic or flight nurse crew that is tending to the patient.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Nick's going to talk a little bit about the day we had today because it was quite interesting and how we were staffed and the calls we had. So go ahead, Nick.
Yeah, today, granted, this isn't the norm, but I think this is kind of where we're headed. Today was interesting. I mean, we're, again, at reduced staffing, or basically our minimum staffing, where we have 2 road cars during the day. We've had, from what I counted, 4 calls today that sat in what we call a pending status, meaning the call was received by dispatch, but there wasn't an available officer to handle the call, so it sat pending until an officer was available to handle that call. We've had 1 call that stood pending for an hour and a half, and then 3 other calls that were at 2 hours, and that was when I went home at 4 o'clock. I don't know how long they held after I left, but they were already at 2 hours, which is pretty much unheard of for our municipality to not be able to provide service for that long. And they were fairly significant calls. There was one County Family Services wanted to take 2 children from a home that held for an hour and a half, and then actually had to be put back in pending because the Family Services employee didn't have the proper paperwork. And then once they did have the proper paperwork, I believe it held for at least another hour, to the point that the social worker had dispatch, have the officer call her when they're on the way, because they waited an hour and a half for the first time. The second call was a harassment complaint with a complainant that was waiting in the lobby. They asked for the officer's ETA, or estimated time of arrival, on 2 different occasions while they were waiting. And after not wanting to wait anymore, they went home and asked for the officer to call them at home. Another one was a retail theft that occurred at a local store. The suspect left the scene, was seen at a different store nearby, but we had no officers to be able to send. Again, that was held for 2 hours. And then once it was dispatched, the officer who was en route to the call had to be pulled off that call again for another in-progress call that was occurring with a trespassing, possible stalking case. And then the 4th call we had was a welfare check of a female that was, people were unable to reach her, and that her front door was standing open. That one held for 2 hours. The reason these held for so long was because at about noon, we had a weapons call where a gun was displayed during a child custody exchange. That tied up all the officers and the supervisor on the road for the better part of that hour and a half, 2 hours. And then once they cleared that scene, within a few minutes, we actually got called back to that, not to the scene, but a different location in the village, where that disturbance that occurred at that location actually started up again in a different area of the village, where people were trying to ram each other with cars as a result of that, which again tied all the officers up on the road for another significant amount of time. And then we also, once one officer was able to clear for a juvenile that was out of control, the one officer responded to that. It didn't come out as a juvenile out of control initially, so they sent one officer. Once he got on scene and realized what was going on, he called for help right away. He was struggling with a 14-year-old male that was out of control. We had to call Hobart Lawrence and Brown County Sheriff, and also Commander Murphy and I both responded out to that from our offices to try to lend some assistance. So it's just a little bit scary that we're sending, having one officer with no backup available in the village. This is, again, not the norm. This is a pretty extreme example, but with the way, we've said with the fire rescue calls, our police calls have also been increasing on a similar rate. Again, I think the biggest thing is just because there are so many more people coming to the village because of all the additional things that are going on, such as Titletown and the mall kind of reopening up after COVID, and a lot more of the concerts happening, a lot more things happening in the village that people want to come and be a part of. There's more people, and that obviously brings its own set of problems with that. But yeah, so this was our day today, and I guess the only other thing I wanted to touch on with this is pertaining to the weapons calls. Is a lot of the calls that are going on today are taking a lot more time than they used to take. Weapons calls take a lot of time because you need to be careful and deliberate about how you approach those. Our emergency detention or mental health holds are also taking a significant longer time to process because there's a whole medical component that we have to clear before they would be brought to a mental health hospital. Just this past weekend after the soccer game, we had a male that we had contact with that was attempting suicide by cop. That started at about 4 o'clock in the morning right out here on Holmgren Way. I don't believe our officers cleared that call until 10 or 11 in the morning after they got medical clearance from the hospital and found a place for him to go and brought him to that facility to get treatment. So That was handled by a night shift officer that held over until 10 or 11 in the morning, so an extra 4 hours past his normal shift end time. So things just take a lot longer to process.
Yeah, that was one of the things that we highlighted on the last presentation was the type of calls that we were having and what is involved in that and how we evolve as an agency doing those types of calls as well. So I just wanted Nick to touch on that with you guys to give you and I a good understanding of some of the challenges that we face on a daily basis, depending on the calls. So this next slide is talking about efficiency. I've had some questions as I came on about how our department operates, how efficient it is. And this really, what this slide is talking about is how we compare to other agencies. Obviously, there aren't many public safety agencies across the nation. So really what we thought we would do is break it out to give you guys a good understanding of how we compare to our nearest complement, which is De Pere. And so we kind of compare ourselves that way. But what we did was we broke ourselves out into what the equivalent would be for law enforcement and fire and EMS. So as you can see on the Ashwaubenon public safety side, we have 3 admin, which is the equivalent of about 1.5 on the law enforcement side and 1.5 on the fire and EMS side. We have investigators, drug task force, school resource officers. That's 7 because they're straight law enforcement, so we didn't have to break those down. We have 9 shift supervisors, which comes to about 4.23 on the law enforcement side and 6 on the fire EMS side. 27 shift public safety officers. If you use the equation that we were using prior, that comes out to 12.69 law enforcement and 18 on the fire and EMS side. And then we have night shift officers and K-9 officer, which again, they're straight law enforcement, so that's 5. So if you think about our staff, we have 51 officers. If you break that down to the equivalent, on the law enforcement equivalent is about 30.42, and fire and EMS is 25.5. So we are a 31 police officer department if you break it out and separate it out, and we are a 26 officer fire department. So really you're, as being efficient and functioning, you're getting the work of 57 officers with only 51 people. And so that's really what we try to do with this slide is to kind of separate it out so we can compare how we stack up to other agencies such as De Pere. And that's what we continue to do on the next slide. So we have 51. De Pere has 37 sworn officers. De Pere Fire has 29 fire and EMS. If you look at the command staff, we have 3. De Pere PD alone has 3, and they have 5 on De Pere Fire and EMS. So both of them, you add those up, that's 8, and we have 3. Supervisors, we have 10. They each have 6, so we have 10, they have 12. 32 public safety officers. They have, the PD side, they have 18 on patrol and 19 on fire and EMS. And so on down the line as far as what they have. We have 6 investigators, they have 8. De Pere has a traffic officer as well. They also have a community officer. So we have 19 paid on call firefighters. De Pere Fire has 20 part-time firefighters. So if you think about it, we have 51 full-time officers. And if you compare and combine De Pere PD and fire, they have 66. So really, if you talk about how we operate, we have 15 less sworn full-time officers than they do. So, if you think about, and we'll talk a little bit about the calls and history and how we stack up to De Pere, for example. So CAD is computer-aided dispatch. So it's really the dispatch calls that we're getting. So if you look at the blue line, which is us, and De Pere is the red line, and this is broken out by quarters, you can see we basically follow the same trend as De Pere. However, we've always been higher than them. And if you look at the last quarter, the first quarter in 2022, we're trending up, they're trending down in calls. So really, that's how we stack up with less people. We don't have a traffic officer, and we have less patrol coverage and no community officer as well. So I really wanted to give you an indication, and Brian did a good job of putting these numbers together on how we stack up with them and a community similar to our size. They don't have the special events like we do, obviously, but this kind of talks about the law enforcement calls for service. Equally on the fire and EMS side, the purple line is De Pere and the blue line is us. One thing to note, if you look at the calls for service, De Pere has 2,724. We have 2,468. But the big difference is they have 2 stations that they're running out of, and we only have 1 station that we're running out of. So they can divide their calls up between these stations. So if you break it down per station, they only have, around 1,500 calls out of each station, while we have still that 24, almost 2,500 calls that we're dealing with. So really, they handled, De Pere Fire handled 91 calls for us, either contract, because they contract part of the village. We have them over on the southeast corner helping us out there, or mutual aid, and we've responded to only 24 of their mutual aid rescue calls. So we do kind of have that agreement where we're helping each other out as best we can. But this kind of gives you a comparison how our fire rescue calls stack up with De Pere as well.
Brian, quick question on the Pioneer Station. Is that staff mainly with volunteers? And
yep, that's our paid on-call staff only. So if we have a major fire or major emergency, we page them out, and whatever they can, depending on their schedules, they'll come out, and they're usually able to get a crew out to help us out. Usually that's 3 or 4 paid on-call right at a time.
We have utilized them several times over the past 2 weeks at various crash scenes where we maybe had another call going on. I remember there was a crash at 172 in Packerland last week that required extrication. We sent an engine there and requested a Green Bay ambulance, and then our Station 2 engine also arrived to assist with traffic control.
Brian, could I just clarify one thing? In the southern part of the village, we contract with De Pere for them to cover that. That's not mutual aid, correct?
Correct, yep. Okay. Contract and mutual aid services is what I was talking about there.
Yeah.
Yep.
So how far north do they come up to service in that contract area in our southern boundary?
It's kind of generally it's south of Main Avenue. It's not exactly, there's some pockets and stuff, but it's generally south of West Main Avenue is covered by De Pere Rescue.
So there's been some talk about what it looks like when you go on calls and how many officers or firefighters or EMTs are on call. Talk a little bit about our efficiency and how we operate as a staff. We try to be as flexible as we can based on the initial assessment. So, unlike a traditional law enforcement agency, our public safety officers can go out there and they can assess the situation, whether it's a rescue call or a fire call. They can make that initial determination. They can render aid right away, whereas law enforcement can't, especially more complex cases. However, we can use them, the officers, to, if it's a basic call, we can use them to give a ride back so we don't have to backfill the station. But really what it is we're talking about not chasing our ambulance with a fire unit. So most traditional fire departments, if you have a rescue call, there may be an officer that shows up, but a 3-person, normally ambulance crew goes out as well. And also they chase that with a a large, a $750,000 fire apparatus with another 4 firefighters that are coming along on every call. We don't do that. Our efficiency is basically we have an officer go out there, they're assessing the situation, they're rendering aid if they can, and then we have an ambulance come out, and depending on the type of call, if it's a basic service, then that officer can take one of those, the EMT, back to the station, and when they can be ready for another call. If it's a paramedic or an ALS, then they stay with that, and then that 3-person crew goes in, and we may have to backfill the station depending on what it is. But we're really, really efficient in that regard, because not only can we assess the situation faster, we can render aid faster, but we're also we have less personnel on scene than a traditional fire department does when they're going out to these calls. So that's really a nice option for us. It's really a good service to the community because our first responders are truly first responders, and they can help out in any situation. If it's a fire scene, for example, they can evaluate, they can call for whatever is needed for, trucks that come in to help out. If we need to call for a MABUS or a call box, they can do that and get that done right away. We can roll it in. So we really are more efficient in that regard when it comes to that. We also allow, our staffing allows for flexibility when it comes to civil unrest or backfilling station, whatever it might be, allows us for surge capacity as well. So our 51 officers, if we were strictly a law enforcement agency, let's say we only had 31, it'd be very difficult for us to work the special events, the Packer games, fill those spots with what we have. So our public safety model allows us to handle this influx of special events, these marathons, the Packer games, the Beats nights, or whatever is in Titletown, the Resch Center events that we're only getting more and more of. It allows us that ability, that surge capacity to fill those roles. So that's really what this slide is talking about in that regard, to help out with the efficiency portion and really how we operate in Ashwaubenon. The public safety model fits us very well doing that. Let's talk a little bit about recent history. In 2020, we had several resignations, a few retirements. We had 10 sworn retirements from 2019 to 2021. We had one public safety officer that left to go to another agency. We had one supervisor that left to go to another fire department. We had a public safety officer that left to go to, well, back to their original EMS agency. And we had 2 public safety officers who left the career altogether after being hired here. So if you look, this is really talking about the changes. All these names that are highlighted in orange have left the department. We've obviously hired a new chief. I came on in February of 2020. Also during this whole transition, I went from a 2-commander system to a deputy chief and a commander system to allow for more structure and a chain of command in that regard. As you can see in this slide, everybody in green is either new or been promoted or moved to a different location within the department. So we have a lot of change in the department since I've been hired. We have 5 public safety officers currently in training, like we talked about, 2 on light duty FMLA, 2 starting in medical school in July. So in the short period of time that I've been here, we've had 15 sworn that have been hired. 5 lieutenants have been promoted to captain. 1 has retired. We've had 5 public safety officers promoted to lieutenant. 1 of them resigned and went to a different department. But as you can see, a lot of change has happened in the short time that I've been here. Okay. Really what these next slides are going to talk about is our sworn staff. So in 2005, we had an authorized sworn staff of 48. We had a full-time dispatch center at that point in records. We had 7 there, but our 24-hour line staff in 2005 was 36. In 2022, our authorized sworn staff has increased by 3 to 51. We have no dispatch anymore, so we just have records. We have 2 full-time and 2 part-time, but our 24-hour line staff hasn't changed. We're still at 36. In that time, as I said, we've only increased by 3. We added 1 command staff member. That was before me. They added an additional commander. They also added a position for the drug task force, which is held by the county. And then they added 1 night power officer. So that's, even though they've added 3, they haven't necessarily been to the line staff. And that's the point of this slide, is to let you guys know that 3 additional went to night power, to the drug unit, and as a command staff member.
So does the drug task force officer ever do anything but work with the drug task force? Is that what they're strictly?
Yeah, they're assigned to the drug task force. That's their main responsibility. Do they come back and help us out? Yes. They come back and help us out during the Packer games, assignments like that. They can work and help us out in that regard, but their primary assignment is the drug task force. Okay, this next slide is the fire and EMS calls. Really what we want to talk about, and Brian touched about it earlier, is the change in response in the call volume on fire EMS side. You can see in the graph, and this goes by year, what it's really looking like. As you can see, it's continually trending up all the way up to 2021, where it took a pretty good jump after the COVID year, but it's really a 41% increase from 2005 to 2021 with no change to staffing. And as you see, we staff a first out paramedic level ambulance. and we have additional ambulances in the department as we can do. So normally we get 2 ambulances out, depending on staffing, we may get 3, but that's tough for us. But this chart really talks about, and as we've been talking about so far, is how our EMS calls continually, steadily increase based on the services that we provide in the population of the community. And this slide, again, talking about efficiency, is talking about CAD, computer-aided dispatch calls for service. This is comparing those with De Pere. We have lower minimum staffing, which means we don't have as many people on the road. We have a road supervisor on. We have 2 public safety officers on from 3 to 7. We have 3 public safety officers on from 7P to 3A. We don't have a traffic car. We don't have a community service officer. And we continually outpace De Pere, which has higher minimums. And Commander Murphy was just telling me that they're looking to add to those minimums. But they generally have a road supervisor on, 2 officers on 24/7. They generally have 3 officers on. Weekends could be up to 4. They have a traffic car and a community, so they have more people to deal with their workload than we have, and yet we have more calls for service than they do. Any questions on that? So this, really what we're talking about is our staffing has remained the same despite a 41% increase in calls for fire and EMS and continually outpacing De Pere and law enforcement. So we talk a little bit about station standbys and what that is. We've kind of changed how we've structured our standbys and how we want to staff those. Really what this slide, and I'm going to try to condense this down a little bit for you, really what this standby is, an emergency call-in is, as you can see in 2017, 2018, 2019, we continually had more pages for standbys, more people coming in. And with the change and how we've structured that to 1 supervisor, 2 PSOs for station standby, is those have all come down. You can see the last remaining graphs, they've all come down, and we are trying to make sure that we're being as efficient and as effective as possible. And this chart really shows how that has affected us in really lowering that amount. So cut down on our overtime. Speaking of overtime, this slide talks about what our budgeted amount of overtime is. 2022, our budgeted OT is $505,750, and this breaks it down as to really where those overtime hours go. Staffing related, reimbursed amount that we get partially reimbursed from the Packers or special events or traffic grants. Training takes up a lot of overtime, obviously. We have to train off shift, and we really kind of, training is one of those areas where we don't want to cut our overtime budget because really that's kind of an insurance policy, right? We're making sure that our officers are trained and up to date in the standards that they need to be so they're operating as efficiently as possible. So that really only leaves a small amount to anything else that would happen in the community that we would have to do. Any major event that would require overtime. We have a casino shooting that happened not too long ago that required more. So we have a little bit of cushion in that regard depending on what it is. Speaking of critical incidents, we have certainly had our share here, maybe not to the extent that some other areas have, but we've certainly had our share. 2020 led to civil unrest, protesters. We had the casino shooting in 2021. We had June storms, obviously, in 2022. And really, our staffing allows for us specifically to handle the needs of the community because we are public safety officers, because we're able to adapt and we can assign people where they're needed to and meet those needs of our community in that regard. So I just wanted to bring this forward to you guys to let you know that we're not immune from these. We're not immune, just like the rest of the country isn't immune to these critical incidents. We're having them here as well. I did make a little bit of a modification to this slide today, actually, because I was going in looking at our signups and noticed that, our board in the back, so that top picture is in our muster room where our signups are for our officers. And you can't see it very well on there, but all of those sheets are signups for either special events, Packer overtime, Title Town, court overtime. All of those are up there for officers to sign up, and if they don't sign up, we have to order them in for those. So this just gives you a little idea of what it looks like on a daily basis in our back room, where officers have to take a look at these and figure out, well, can we work? Can I work? Can I work? What family events do I have going on? Is it happening? And hopefully I don't get ordered. The bottom one is the recent Cellcom Marathon, where you can see we had, oh boy, I don't even count those out. How many overtime slots we got there, Nick?
So I couldn't tell you off the top of my head. I know we had enough spots to cover that we couldn't cover them all with our agency. I did have to request assistance from Hobart Lawrence PD to cover 2 spots, Oneida Tribal Police to cover 2 spots, and then Green Bay took a spot for us also. And I think I still had to order in, I think only 1, but I did have to order in an officer yet on top of getting help.
Yeah, it looks like there's about 20 spots or somewhere in there. I didn't count them out
Can I
specifically.
ask one question about that specific event?
Yeah.
Didn't they change their route that created a lot of issues?
Yeah.
Significantly. They used to start and end in the city of Green Bay. They would just come through Ashwaubenon, which I think we only needed probably about a dozen or so officers, maybe 10. But yeah, now with it starting and ending in the village, it significantly impacted the number of staff we needed to provide.
Right.
Significantly impacted parts of the village too, right, Gary?
Yes.
I will add also that the help I received was just on the law enforcement side. Green Bay Fire Department had to completely handle all the EMS because we had nobody left to cover EMS. So they handled everything pertaining to EMS for the event.
But that didn't change necessarily the signups. I mean, even when it was the old route, we still had several signups for the Cellcom Marathon, just not quite as extensive as it was, but yeah. So this slide talks a little bit about, that marathon. It talks about rest center events, and the needs that we have to cover there. Usually that's EMS. Sometimes we have county rescue kind of help cover those as well. We use our paid on-call firefighters to help in that regard. Political visits, I think 2024 is going to be crazy for us, depending on who runs, especially on the Republican side. That's going to take quite a bit of resources. They always seem to like to have political visits. They always come to Green Bay, at least at some point. So that could be, something that we obviously have to take into consideration. And then, we're looking at several requests for hiring officers for security. We've had that as well. People want us to come in and provide security for them, individual business. I know there's been a couple of places here that want us to provide security for them. We may or may not do that. We always charge them an overtime rate to do that, so that's very expensive for them to be able to accomplish that. And we try not to do that as much as possible. It's just another added overtime demand on our officers to do that kind of stuff. And so we've turned those away. So that leads into burnout factors. And really, that's some of the things that I'm concerned about. I know Mary and Joel have talked about that too. They're concerned about it as well. But some of the burnout factors, and we have quite a few of them, are prolonged exposure to work stress. We have that high job demand, lack of resources and manpower, and that really goes back to all of the things that we have to do as a public safety agency based on how we operate and the events that we have that require not only our officers to work on shift, but it requires them to work off shift on their days off to come in and handle all these incidents, all these special events. So I would really like to make sure that I'm providing the resources that I can for our officers, make sure that they are mentally able to perform their job as well. And these are some of the factors that in looking at, we are definitely at high risk, and so are other agencies, so are straight law enforcement, fire EMS. They're at risk too. We just have, I think, a little more subjectivity to that based on how we operate as an agency. So in conclusion, I appreciate you guys listening to me for this length of time. I really think that we operate very effectively. I think we're efficiently structured. We have less command staff. We have less full-time officers. Our model provides for flexibility for EMS response and surge capacity for critical incidents. Are we staffed to be sustainable? I don't think we're staffed to be sustainable. We have not changed our staffing since 2005 up to 2017 with those command staff additions and the DTF position, despite the increase in calls, training, special events. Our FMLA is all draining for our staff. We need to adapt to a changing labor market as well. While the 24-hour schedule is appealing, public safety duties are appealing. The 8-hour 6-3 night shift is not necessarily appealing to all. We need to take a look at the burnout factors and the causes of that and how we retain people. And then we need to plan for future staffing. So I'll talk a little bit more about that maybe next month and how we plan for the future and what that's going to look like for us. So that's all I have for you tonight. Again, I appreciate you letting me ramble on here for a little while. You guys have any questions for us?
I don't have any questions for you at this particular point in time, and I don't want to take a lot of time here now. You've provided us with a lot of good information. And the bottom line is we can't be everything for everyone. There's no such thing as a free lunch. I think we've been very successful. We've used TIP very well. We provide special services, and I think that's been our brand. And the bottom line is I think we need to look at other sources of revenue from our businesses, from the NFL, from entertainment, all those who are using our services, not necessarily the residential in any fashion or format. We don't want that burden to fall on the residential component. But we need to look at our businesses. We need to look at the people we bring into this community. We need to look at their success. And I think we have to look at some additional sources of revenue other than just the taxes to provide for additional manpower to service what we've provided. We provide excellent roads. We provide excellent services. And I think public safety has always been the route that our citizens have always wanted here. I think they enjoy it. But I think we need to think out of the box. And I'm not saying that you guys haven't, okay? Don't get me wrong there. But I think we, as a council, need to look at other sources of revenue that have not necessarily been tapped, but we're at the particular point in time. Look at the Green Bay school systems. They're going to have a real crisis coming up, and we don't want to get in that crisis. We have to be at the forefront. We got to think out of the box. And those who are successful, based on the things that we've done to help them be successful, have to help support public safety in this community. So.
Yeah, I think we all want to provide the best services that we can. We want to make sure that our staff is equipped and we have enough to make sure that we're providing those services. And I think we all want the same thing. And how we do that is really going to take a joint effort from everyone to figure out what those solutions are. But the bottom line is I think that we need to take a serious look at, what resources we have available and how best we can utilize those. But I think we've been doing that for quite a while. I think, again, we've operated very efficiently as a public safety model. We just need a little bit more help, and we need to figure out what that's going to look like in order to provide those essential resources to our community, which they want and deserve. And we're going to do that. We don't want to have them waiting 2 hours to have a call, right? So we want to make sure that we're providing those resources. And if we have areas in the community that need to be serviced that have issues, speeding is always the #1 complaint. We want to have those resources to be able to address those concerns to make our place more enjoyable to live and work, so we can do that.
One of the things that Joel and I have discussed, and the chief knows about this too, we talked about doing possibly some kind of a district down in the entertainment area that could help to pay for some of the officers. By state statute, you cannot use those dollars that you create in a business district to pay for public safety. So, got that from the state. So we have had internal meetings. We've been having a lot of discussions about different stuff. So we'll keep going.
I think I have 2 points, and great, thank you. This is it brings forward some things that I think we need to be addressing. One of the things was what you referred to, that wait time. The other thing that I would like to hear from you is you have your officers, your figures in that I don't think are truly reflecting how many times you're calling an officer in. So how much of that officer's downtime when he's supposed to be home with his family are you interrupting because you have to call him in? And I appreciate that you guys are trying to manage that to a point that you're not impacting people's, your officer's family, and that you're trying to make that be fair. But I'm feeling like you're having to do that more often than you want to pick up that phone and do that. And that just leads me to believe that, yeah, we're being really efficient, but it's putting so much pressure on these PSOs to try to do their job that I just get very fearful of that.
You're absolutely right, and that's a fear that we have as well. And quite honestly, I can say personally I have some apprehension coming to this meeting because I want to make sure that as a command staff, we adequately share those concerns on behalf of our officers. We did have, over the past year and a half or so, we did have one officer who was a good officer, came on board with police, fire, EMS experience. Fire and EMS certification, had put himself through the police academy, was what we refer to as kind of a unicorn candidate, police officer, paramedic, and fire. These are the ideal candidates. It's fair to say that officer in part got burned out by what we had to demand as far as work from a new officer here. The overtime, the unplanned overtime. Right. So when we're short, it leads to unplanned overtime. And when you're hiring younger, motivated officers, good people who are starting families, starting good lives, and this can be the springboard for it, if it's not managed appropriately, it becomes an anchor around their neck, and then they have to make that choice if they stick with our department and some of the demands that we unfortunately have to place on our officers right now, or if they seek greener pastures elsewhere. Now, this officer chose to seek greener pastures elsewhere, and it wasn't money. I can guarantee you that officer is not making what they were making here. Money isn't the only answer. Granted, that's a part of it, and our people deserve to be fairly compensated, but just what you mentioned right there. Right. I know that family concerns were a concern for another one of our officers that left to go to another department. And that's, generally speaking, been pretty rare in the history of Ashwaubenon Public Safety that we lose officers to other comparable departments. Now, the ones we've lost in the past have been generally retirements, or they've gone into a different style of policing. For example, if we lose one to Division of Criminal Investigation, that's a whole different flavor. We're not going to compete with that. But to lose one of our officers, one of our supervisors, no less, to a fire department, to lose one of our public safety officers to a line position at an EMS agency, that is unusual. That grabs attention. That is reflective of a burden that is here that we do need to address, and we're hoping to by bringing this to your attention as well. That has not been the case, and we have to get ahead of that curve.
Yeah, I think going forward, I think we as a board need the guidance as to how you see what type of relief you would need in order to try to
We'll talk about that next time.
Yep. Exactly.
Yep.
I know we're getting into budget season.
Yep.
So we're right at the right time.
Absolutely.
So
we planned well for that.
I just want to thank you guys for the presentation and also for getting it out early so that I could look at it beforehand so I could understand it a little better. I appreciate that. One of the questions I had are things, Nick had mentioned the mental health calls that you had on your really busy day. I think it was today. And I know several months ago, an officer that I know had a young woman riding with him that was a mental health professional. And it was like a pilot program I think you guys were participating in. Yeah. And he was so excited about it because he had 2 calls that morning right in a row, mental health issues. And he's like, she was great. And she settled them down. You didn't have to have 2 or 3 officers coming. So my question is, that pilot still going? Is there any impetus in the area that you're going to continue something like that?
Yes, it's my understanding that that is going to continue. There is an SOG or an agreement signed with multiple agencies in Brown County to provide that service. I know she's not, I think she's only here maybe 2 or 3 times a month, so it's not a great deal.
Yeah.
Kind of have to catch lightning in a bottle for her to actually get on a call. But if we have a citizen in the village that we feel would benefit from her services, who maybe we've dealt with, suddenly over a string of days multiple times, which I know has happened recently, we'll forward that person's information to the clinician for her to follow up on when she does come back, and try to reduce the calls for service and get them connected with help that they need that isn't necessarily in a uniform.
Yeah, so while she's not here, but 2 or 3 times a month, we're still able to use the resources that they provided us and have her look into some of these cases to help us out in that regard.
Okay, any other comments? Okay, thank you very much for very valuable information.
Thanks again for your
well
time.
put together. Okay, 10C, National Night Out. We have National Night Out next week. 10 places that you can go eat. Chief.
I'm looking forward to it. I wasn't able to attend last year because we had COVID in the family, so I'm going to try and hit as many places as I can this year and get out and meet everyone and answer any questions and talk about fun stuff.
Yeah. My goal every year, I've done this now, this will be my, well, minus the COVID year, my 6th year doing it, and my goal is always to hit every one of them. And I always tell every one of them that I'm taking pictures because people don't believe that I was at every single one of them using up all that gas. So I will see you, everybody out there, so. Next week, it's Tuesday from 6 o'clock to 9 o'clock. It's on our website as to where the places are, so. Okay, moving on, 10D, possible action on final approval of grant acceptance and naming rights, David L. and Rita E. Nelson. Rex.
This is for the Ashwaubenon River Trail Bridge. Last December, in closed session, we had the discussion regarding applying for that grant. We were given, I was given a green light by the village board to do so, and with the understanding that if we received the grant, then that landing area, the viewing area, the small plaza on the north point of Ashwaben would be named after David L. and Rita E. Nelson. We received word several weeks ago that we received the grant. In fact, it was a little bit larger than was expected, which was great news to hear. Due to the nature of signing an agreement and finalizing everything, I just wanted to be sure that everyone was on board, more of an information item than everything else, that we're ready to go and sign this and moving forward. A little bit about the project, where we are. We're in the final stages of public comment section, I believe, from the DNR, where people can call in and give their opinions on the bridge project itself. I have not heard from the DNR at this point that a public hearing will be needed, which is good news. We would certainly have one if the DNR felt that we should, that they needed to call one. But at this point, and we only probably have about a week left, a couple more days left. We're moving forward on probably having the DNR call us and tell us that, give us the green light, basically, and then we're into the final bid spec phase with Grafe, so we can get this thing out to the contractors.
Good.
So what I'm looking for you all tonight, sorry, is just final approval of the grant agreement, for me to go ahead and sign off on that.
I'd make a motion to authorize you to sign the grant agreement as submitted.
I'd second it.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to accept the grant acceptance and naming rights for David L. and Rita E. Nelson grant. Any other discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried.
Thank you.
Good job.
10E, action on 2022 sidewalk and parking lot improvements contract. Mr. Burr.
All right, so this bid was included several parking lots. One was the north parking lot, or the public safety parking lot. a couple parking lots out by the Cornerstone Sport Complex, and then some sidewalk work, and some other miscellaneous intersection improvements. Unfortunately, with the current nature of the bidding environment, we only received one bid that was from Northeast Asphalt. And reviewing the prices and the values that we had gotten from Northeast Asphalt with Greg and Joel, just came in so high. We've looked at ways how to make this work, maybe separate out some of the projects. And, but I guess the decision that we came to and the recommendation that we have tonight for the board is to reject this bid and package it again, next year or next winter, and bid it out in January, hoping for better prices, oil price, in the environment to go down, and see what we can do next year.
Okay, anybody have any comments about this?
Yes, I do. I've had conversations with Steve and Greg today on this. I understand the pricing is ridiculous today. And not only is pricing ridiculous, trying to find somebody to do it. I get the same answers from contractors or suppliers that I deal with. We can't do it. If you got it, the price is ridiculous. I have to call my customers back and say, hang on to your pants because the price has really increased. So that I can accept. What I'm trying to explain is we have a budget here that is not going to pass for asphalt reasons. Fine, I don't have a problem with that. What I'd like to see is some of the smaller projects taken care of that include safety things for traffic control, striping, handicap things that should be done for some people. Those projects there are budgeted for right now. So I know the village is understaffed. We heard from the public safety, and I heard from Greg and Mary this afternoon on how tight things are here. But I'd like to see some of these smaller items taken care of that are within the budget plan right now. So I hope that through staff people that they would take that in consideration to take care of some of the smaller items that are on this plan right now. So I will leave that up to staff to try and work them in with the staff that they got within our village here. So I'll leave it at that at this moment. Greg, you got something to say?
Joel?
Yeah, I'll try to answer, and Steve can answer too. Certainly, as part of the bid package, we had the parking lots, and we had some of these smaller projects that were included in that. Unfortunately, we're not able to continue with those smaller projects without inclusion of some of the larger scale numbers of the parking lots. So our recommendation from staff is to reject the bid because the contractor is just not going to be willing to do the smaller projects under that same price point. I know Steve and staff have reached out to some of the contractors that were either primary or subcontractors on this bid, and they are unavailable to complete the work outside of that contract. That's why the pricing was so high. But we can certainly work internally to look at ways that we can either provide some temporary improvement to some of those safety issues, as Gary had mentioned, or simply look for maybe another contractor with availability yet this fall. So we'll make our effort to see if there's any availability. Because of the price value of those projects, they're under $25,000. They are not subject to public sealed bidding, so we can go out and solicit competitive quotes for that. And so we'll make every effort to try to get that accomplished yet before the snow flies.
I would make a motion to reject the bid from Northeast Asphalt and request that staff take a look at some of these special projects that Gary has alluded to and bring them back as appropriate to the board if necessary, or to outright take them or undertake them on your own volition if the numbers allow you to do so.
I'll second that.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second to reject the bid from Northeast Asphalt and direct staff to look at some of the special projects and see if there's anything we can get done. Okay?
Under discussion, I had the same conversation with Steve Gary, I think today as well, asking them to break some things out. And it sounds like staff has really done their due diligence to try to do that and reached out to other contractors and things. And I would encourage you to keep doing that. One of the things I asked Steve about was the development specifically in the Titletown area, because Green Bay is putting some sidewalks in as well in the Brett Favre Pass area and Bart Starr. And Steve, I suggested maybe reach out to Green Bay and see if we could tie into their contract. But he said they'd already done that, and Green Bay has put their project on hold as well for the sidewalks up in that area. So that really is not an option. But hopefully you guys can find some way to do some of it, to get some of it taken care of, because we just keep falling further and further behind on things otherwise.
Is there anything urgent, Steve, in this package here that really needs to be done ASAP, or is this, you know, I know we kind of got a process where, all right, we need to keep up on these so they don't get way run down, the different parking lots and that. Is there anything that's higher priority than another here, you know, like Bart Starr pathway or the parking lot, or?
Yeah, I think some of the striping, some of the smaller ticket items that we have on there for Oregon and Brookwood and Ridge and Valley View, some of that just from a safety standpoint.
Yeah.
We're going to reach out to the contractor that may be able, be available to finish that up for us. It's a smaller ticket item. There's a sidewalk or some sidewalk improvements over by San Luis and Cormier. It just depends on workloads. That's what we're running up against with the contractors, that everybody got delayed this year in the spring starting, and there's a lot of work out there, and their availability is just next to none. But they gave prices to Northeast because they're a big general contractor. That's why they were looking to jump on board with them, and they may be willing to work with us still. We'll reach out to them some more.
Well, it doesn't even really sound like it's a dollar issue. It's just flat out availability. I mean, even to approve a higher contract like this, you probably still wouldn't get them done.
That's what they're telling us. Yep. So it's a combination, though. Higher prices and availability.
So, Greg, from a budget standpoint, then this money just, what, can it be moved to something else? As long as we have something budgeted, I'd like to, we have a dollar amount allocated to something. If we can't get it done because of availability, and I'm saying these projects, these other projects, especially the ones that Gary's talking about, yeah, we got to get some of those done. But if we still got some money there budgeted, and we can do something with that and not run into the problem of availability, can we take a look at that?
So when we talked internally, we have funds available in some of our prior TIF projects or existing TIF debt that's broadly labeled as road reconstruction for the smaller ones that we can handle that. Yeah, so we wouldn't have to dip into any excess, tax levy dollars. We have existing dollars available. Then we're gonna group together again in the next month or two during the budget process and identify projects where we're at. We've had cost overruns on almost every project, so we have to address potentially a pedestrian bridge, for example. They may need to come do another bonding later this year, and we'll kind of package this all together in anticipation of another bid for some of these projects that we're going to pass on now. But the smaller ones we should be able to handle with existing funds available from other TIF projects.
A couple other funding sources for these projects, like the parking lot, I believe that was ARPA funding, so we do not need to spend that until 2024. So allocating it to next year for that same purpose or project would be appropriate. Some of the sidewalk projects, as Greg had alluded to, are TIF 3 or TIF 5 related projects, so they'll stay within their TIF project plan, and then when they can come forward, they'll be completed at that time. So unless you desire to reallocate the ARPA funding for other projects, they will just stay within that special revenue fund until such time that it gets spent for either that allocated project or a redesignated project within the ARPA ARPA parameters.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to reject the bids and direct staff. Any other comments? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carried. Thank you. 10F, action on 2022 budget timeline. Craig?
So I have here it's a 2023 budget timeline.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's okay.
2023. I didn't put my glasses on.
Basically, timeline's consistent with prior years, kind of work backwards. We have to adopt by the end of November, so I've got our November board meeting as the adoption date. We'll do a meeting on the schedule right now, the joint village board finance personnel on Tuesday, November 15th. That'll be the big meeting where we go everything. So all the time from really now, I'm preparing everything. I have on here just one minor modification due to some scheduling conflicts. Actually, it's hard to get all the key stakeholders in the room at the same time. We're going to move the kickoff meeting from Thursday, August 18th to Monday, August 22nd. Pretty much everyone's busy anyway. No one's going to be jumping on it that first day. So we'll go over the expectations, and then they have roughly a month to prepare the budget, get it in, and then I compile all that, start meetings with Mary and Joel, and then from there we'll have meetings with all the department heads and wait for the state to finalize assessment and equalize value numbers, et cetera, et cetera. So it's going to be challenging. We'll be addressing a lot of these side projects. We have ARPA funds to discuss and set a plan for that as well. So we'll bring that forward. I will give an update probably at the September meetings to where we're at, have a better feel for some of our bigger project plans. And so that's the budget timeline. So any questions?
So Greg, this is your itinerary till the November 22nd meeting.
Yes.
Good luck.
Yeah.
He'll be busy. Okay, I need a motion to approve the timeline, please.
I'll move to approve the 2022 budget timeline.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve the 2023 budget timeline. Any more discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you. 10G, action on employee benefits insurance services agreement renewal. Joel?
Thank you, Madam President. The Village of Ashwaubenon has been contracting with Hayes Companies for the better part of several years to assist us in employee benefit administration. The Village of Ashwaubenon is a fully self-insured benefit provider, so essentially we're not buying insurance to cover our employees. Our premiums that are being applied are going towards the direct cost associated with the benefits that are being administered by a variety of different preferred providers, in-network, out-of-network, so on and so forth. Essentially, Hayes, what they do is they assist us in developing that plan design, assist us in working with different administrative agencies like United Healthcare or UMR, Delta Dental, to assist with other administrative billing purposes and benefit administration. But then also, as I mentioned, working specifically with us in developing that plan design, whether we're a high deductible HSA eligible plan that we offer our employees, or for a preferred provider opportunity type network. They assist us in developing that plan design and then also in analyzing our specific and direct costs per employee and per unit, if you will, whether you're an individual or a family member on our plan. And then by doing so, they develop that premium contribution and then work through other parameters of law. In the time that we've worked with Hayes, they have been recently bought out by a company called Brown & Brown. So sometimes you'll see communication. This is Hayes Companies, a member of Brown & Brown. That there's really no difference in service. They just have a larger parent company that now has ownership interest in them. We've had a very, very good working relationship. They've been very helpful in designing our plan and working with our health committee and being very responsive to costs and to other impacts that we may have within the overall administration of our health benefits. Again, such as moving us from a PPO plan to a high deductible HSA eligible plan, thus resulting in significant savings to the village and to individual members. also assisting us in securing stop-loss insurance, being that we are fully self-insured. We do purchase stop-loss for high claim cost claimants, and assisting and navigating that. They've worked with us in developing a relationship with UMR to assist with medical billing and explanation of benefits, and then navigating that whole network. And then they've been also very instrumental in maintaining our relationship with the school district and Bellin Health in providing the A+ clinic, which has also proven to be a very financially smart decision for us and our healthcare. So we propose recommending a renewal of a 3-year agreement with Hayes to continue to assist us in these insurance administrative services. Their proposal does have an increase of 3% from the prior 3-year agreement. So the total annual cost for their services would be $26,265. This item was brought forward to Finance and Personnel back in June, actually, and so they did recommend approval for that item. And so with that, I'll answer any questions that you might have regarding Hayes.
Any questions, comments?
There's no questions or comments. I move to approve the employment benefits insurance services with Hayes Company with a sum of $26,265.
Second.
Go ahead.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve the service agreement with Hayes Company, Brown & Brown, for the period of October 1, 2022 to September 30th, 2025, in the amount of $26,265. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you. 10H, action on technology services contract. Mr. Wenholz.
Sure. I'm not sure how many are aware, but when right now, currently we have, well, you know, Jeremy is our IT guy, right? We also have continued services with Harbor Technologies, and that's Craig Kramer. Prior to Jeremy, Craig Kramer was the guy that kind of took the village out of the dark ages technology-wise, created networks, created email, created all that. He was our guy. And then we wanted to bring someone full-time. He's kind of an independent contractor guy and didn't necessarily want to do that. So, but we've maintained services with him over the years. He's been invaluable to helping Jeremy grow and learn the business, if you will, and help him on a monthly basis with a lot of different projects. His role currently with the village is more programming related. So he is basically created our building inspection software. He's got some fuel maintenance software, some other things as well with the village. So we have a contract with him. And oddly, it's a July to June contract, so it's due. I had a discussion with him about raising rates. He has not charged or asked for a rate increase since he's been doing that, since he's left the role of network administrator. And it's a significantly low rate. It's $70 an hour compared to what's out there on the market. He's asking for a modest increase in this contract. I'd also like to extend it out to the end of 2026. The software that we use is not something we're going to lose and get rid of. And like I said, when we do weekend server upgrades, he's in with Jeremy helping, providing assistance, invaluable assistance. The way that his contract was set up in the past, it's about 500 hours. We're averaging about 375. So we're able to do these price increases for the rest of this year and next year without adjusting the budget. And actually, we'd be looking at this as focusing more, balancing his time and balance to the budget dollars versus the hours, and he's fine with that. And I think if we have some kind of bigger need out there that comes up, we can address it and come to the committee and board at that point in time. But we may have to look at it in 2024, just depending on where his hours have been coming through. But overall, we're able to hold steady at those hours. So I'm proposing a contract extension through the end of 2026. With Harbor Technologies, with rate increases. I think they're in the contract. Entertain any questions.
Craig has been with us for quite some time. He's been very valuable. The rates are very approachable. I mean, they're good rates. With that, I would make a motion to approve the 5-year contract with Harbor Technologies as presented.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve the contract with Harbor Technologies with the rate increase and extending through December 31, 2026. Any other comments? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you.
Thank you.
10I, action on resolution R7-1-22, approving the permit fee schedule in the village of Ashwaubenon in Brown County, Wisconsin. Patrick?
This is a request from the inspection department to add 2 permit fees to the fee schedule, the permit fee schedule. And speaking with the inspection department, there's been a significant amount of time spent on, in particular, new site plan review for commercial property, as well as 1 to 2 family site plans for review. For example, one of the inspectors told me today that there was possibly 3 to 4 hours spent on just one site plan alone. And what this does is essentially capture some of the village expenses and time that it took to review the site plans. I can tell the board that this is in conformity with a lot of other ordinances throughout different municipalities, in particular on the attachments that were submitted for the fee schedule for permits. Residential building permits, the letter T, $75 is requested to be added for plan review of 1 to 2 family dwelling, and the same for commercial properties on the next page on letter T, $75. Where that number came from, the inspection department basically looked at other municipalities and kind of determined what a fair and accurate permit fee would be based on the size of the village and the amount of time it spends for these. So really, it's a request from the inspection department to add these, to include these in the permit fee schedule based on the review of all the site plans that they do.
Okay, does anybody want to make a motion?
I'll move to approve the fee as presented in this R-7-1-22.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve resolution R7-1-22 with the permit fee schedule change. Any more discussion?
Is this enough?
I had the same
Because if I do four hours and $75 per dwelling, that gets below $20 an hour.
You know, some of these inspections that I've been kind of involved in, they're spending an awful lot of time at them.
Yeah.
You know, everybody is trying to get away as reasonable as possible, and that does not meet some of the codes and whatever to the standards that should be. So it's taking our people more time to get it right. So yeah, I kind of agree with you on some of these are pretty light.
I mean, I would almost like to see that be a per hour. If that's what's happening, that
Right.
we're spending hours on it, I'd like to see them come back instead of a $75 per dwelling. I would like to see some sort of an hourly rate that makes sense for them, for the work that they're doing.
Especially for the difficult ones. Because
Yeah.
if they're going to get charged that, they're not going to be fooling around like some of them have.
I can relay those comments back to the inspection department. I guess to keep in mind, and maybe I should have been a little bit more thorough on the explanation, it is a review for the site plan itself. It's not necessarily for the inspection of the dwelling. So when the plan comes in, it might take 3 to 4 hours per site plan. So if a developer has multiple dwellings on their development site, they submit 3 at once, that might take 3 or 4 hours. I think the $75 was determined based on their rate and their time that they're putting in as of right now, and they felt that $75 was appropriate. My recommendation, I suppose, would be to approve the resolution as submitted, and I will take the comments back. Certainly talk to Aaron about that, and if there's a need to increase that. And I can tell the board that it kind of falls in the middle between from low-end site plan review permits to some are obviously to the high end. So I'll take that feedback back to the inspection department and they can resubmit if needed.
I'm not so concerned about, you know, some smaller, even residential or anything like that, but some of these bigger projects that we're getting into, I mean, they're taking quite a bit of time and effort, and $75 doesn't come close to covering the amount of effort that our staff is putting in. I would like to see, it's kind of piggybacking on what Steve said before, we should be getting more revenue back out of our, out of these developers. These developers are always coming to us, asking for us for everything. I think we got to say, hey, guys, we're providing this service, and we need to be paid for it better.
I could support this, I understand, and I think sometimes you need a set fee for a certain work effort. Sometimes you're going to have 2 hours, sometimes you're going to have 4 hours. You're going to charge somebody for 2 hours versus someone for 4 hours. You probably have to have a set fee, I understand that. And I'll support this in approving this, but I think we need to look at all of our fee structures during the budget process, because right now, building inspection, unfortunately, well, fortunately or unfortunately, I'm doing that in Kiwani right now, and that's a whole bucket of fun. And you have to make phone calls, you talk to people come in, and I mean, it's a lot of give and take as you go forward. That being said, I think we should go forward, as Patrick has recommended, but we need to look at our fee structures during the budget process.
Okay. And I really think if we are truly spending our per hour time, we should be charging an hourly fee. And I get the difficulty with that. I get that's not an easy thing, but especially on these bigger projects, I think that's where we need to say, hey, look, and I don't know, maybe Aaron could give us some guidance as what would he consider, yeah, we should be charging an hourly rate on this type of a project, and we should be just charging a flat fee for this type of project.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second to approve the permit fee schedule as presented, and Mr. Patrick will take it back to Aaron and see if we need to adjust that $75 fee. Okay? All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you. 10J, consider, discuss, act on ordinance 07-2-22, creating section 9-1-9, graffiti abatement of chapter 9, criminal code, article 1, miscellaneous offenses of the village of Ashwaubenon, municipal code, Brown County, Wisconsin, relating to removing graffiti on property. Mr. Legal.
This was a request from the Public Safety Department to create an ordinance mandating that an owner of a property essentially remove graffiti when it has been tagged. I can tell the board, I've done a lot of research regarding to other municipalities and what comparing theirs to before drafting this, and there are a lot of municipalities in the state that already have this. Basically what this says is that if a building has been tagged that's determined to be graffiti, they will have notice to remove or abate the graffiti. The notice is 14 days, and if they don't remove it, essentially the village can remove it on their behalf. One, they can be cited as a violation of the municipal code and go through municipal court, and then they also can be, that cleanup can be charged as a special assessment back on the property's tax roll. That's pretty much the basics of the ordinance, and defer to the police department, public safety, if I'm missing anything, or the intent behind the request here.
No, really the intent was to keep our community looking good. Fortunately, we don't have a lot of issues with graffiti. There have been some lately that have popped up, and we want to be able to discourage that. Many of you may or may not know, with graffiti, it always has a purpose. They're tagging or they're making graffiti for a purpose. It's their way of communicating or marking areas. We want to encourage property owners to remove that as soon as possible, and that discourages graffiti altogether. Really, our intent is to be able to say, okay, we've had a location that has had graffiti on it for, some extended time now. We want to contact the owners of that property, whether it's, usually this relates to businesses, and say, hey, we would like you to remove that as soon as possible. We're going to give you a notice, and we're going to give you, maybe 14 days or whatever to remove it. We'll give you some suggestions on how to remove it. And that may be as simple as just painting, depending on what it is, but we'll provide some opportunities for them to use some resources to remove those items as quickly as possible. We don't want to cite people, we just want compliance, and this is really what the intent is.
And could we at that same time maybe put together some sort of pamphlet so they understand the tagging part of that?
Yeah, we can certainly educate them on what's happening and why it's happening, absolutely, yep.
Yeah, I just think that's important because when you first approach them, they're gonna like, man, I just got nailed with graffiti on my building and now I'm getting nailed because I gotta take it off. No, that's not what we're trying to do.
Right.
They gotta understand the education of it and the tagging part of it.
Absolutely, yep.
And to add on that, Jay, the 14 days is more of a crutch for the village. You know, there's certainly discretion there as well. I don't want to make it daunting for the board saying that public safety inspection is going to go site on the 14th day or things like that. That is on there just as a reliance for the board if there's some individuals who simply just refuse to remove it.
Motion to approve ordinance number 07-2-22 as presented.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve ordinance number 07-2-22. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you. 10K, consider, discuss, act on ordinance number 07-1-22, amending section 7-4-100 of Chapter 7, Traffic and Vehicles, Article 4, Parking, Village of Ashwaubenon Municipal Code relating to parking regulations near Parkview Middle School. Mr. Legal.
This is another request from the Department of Public Safety to amend this particular parking prohibition ordinance. The ordinance basically says right now that unless you are engaging or receiving or basically picking up individuals or passengers in this particular area, students, you can't be ticketed. The area right now, there are signs up that do say no parking, and this ordinance enforces the public safety department's authority to ticket or force cars to move. My understanding is the request was basically this has congested traffic on this particular area near Parkview School. And feel free to chime in if I'm missing anything else.
No, you're good. Basically, we want to follow the signs that are already there. Really what the hope is to help alleviate some of the traffic congestion in that area. We talked about it a little bit earlier on what that's going to do. Really, it's going to probably relocate people to probably over by the community center or something like that to pick up and drop off their kids, which in talking with Rex is really a good spot for that to happen. Hopefully that doesn't interfere with his activities over at the community center too much, but really trying to alleviate that congestion in there, trying to avoid any pedestrian issues and parking issues and traffic control on that main Willard area.
Do we, have we communicated with the school district above and, to kind of, I feel like this information needs to be pushed out to the parents. I know how much the parents read it and what they don't, but.
Yeah, they're absolutely aware, and that was one of the reasons why, because they're having all those issues.
Yeah,
they have the handicap stalls in front of the school there, the middle school, and they can't get out because traffic isn't moving, so that really precipitated all of this.
Motion to approve ordinance number 07-1-22.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve ordinance number 07-1-22. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carried. Thank you. Okay. 10L, consider, discuss, act on resolution number R7-2-22, approving the restatement of the qualified retirement plan in the Village of Ashwaubenon in Brown County, Wisconsin. Joel? No, Mr. Legal again.
I did draft the ordinance on request from the Finance Department, but for the specifics, I'm going to defer to Greg on this one. If that's okay.
That's good with me. So just really brief, the qualified retirement plan, the company that we use is what we use for our retirement payouts for our employees for their accrual balances at the time of retirement when they're qualified, sick time, vacation time, et cetera. So basically what this is doing there is some IRS law changes. They're required to update their documentation, and then we're required to come to the board to approve that. In this particular instance, the changes really have zero impact to us. They're mostly for post-retirement benefit options and not for where we would be managing those post-retirement benefits, which we don't do here. So in theory, that's what this is doing. It also just, I believe it's identifying myself to continue to be the administrator on that account to sign off. Is that correct? Right?
Correct.
Yes. So, which is consistent with what we have now as well. So there's really no changes to anything other than the IRS had some specific changes within some of the legal aspects of these agreements. It's a 100-page document if you'd like to read it. No, so, yeah.
I tried to.
Yeah, could you provide me with a synopsis?
Yeah.
And again, it's from an employment standpoint, these are the accruals that are generated that can be then applied towards either direct payment or like health insurance premiums. So think about like sick leave accruals that get paid out at retirement. This does not affect Wisconsin retirement system or anything to that effect. It's specific accruals that get paid out at the point of retirement in accordance to either bargain contracts with public safety or within our employee handbook and employment policies.
Motion to approve resolution number R7-2-22 as presented.
Second.
Second.
Motion and a second to approve resolution number R7-2-22.
One quick question or discussion. In the resolution, it talks about 401A plan, but then in the document itself, it mentions a 401K plan in the Helen Benefits, Inc. Does that make any difference, or is that two different things?
I believe the documentation is covering a lot of variety of options. We don't necessarily participate in all those options. So what we have there might be other things noted in that documentation. That's specifically the changes that they're addressing don't impact us, but we have to update our documentation accordingly.
Okay.
So they just have kind of a big, broad.
Yeah, I mean, I looked through it and you could see there's like
You're
tons
going
of
to see
stuff that
stuff in there
doesn't
that
apply
we
to
don't.
us.
You'll see stuff in there that we don't use.
Right.
It doesn't apply to us.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second to approve that resolution. Any more discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you. Number 11, items for next agenda. If anybody has anything, give the office a call. We'll get it put on the agenda. Number 12, closed session items. During the meeting, the Village Board of the Village of Ashwaubenon may convene into closed session pursuant to 12A, 12B, 12C, and 12D. The Village Board may thereafter reconvene into open session pursuant to Wisconsin Statute Section 19.85, Parent 2, to report the results of the closed session and consider the balance of the agenda. We need a motion to go into closed session.
So moved.
Second.
Roll call, please.
President Kardowski,
Here, yes.
Trustee Service,
Yes.
Trustee Paul,
Yes.
Trustee Krieger,
Yes.
Trustee Kubaki,
Yes.
and Trustee Flukie.
Yes.
We are going into closed session. Thank you, everybody.
This conference is no longer